President Trump is ramping up the pressure on Republican senators as they begin to consider a sweeping package containing many of the president's top priorities. In a social media post this morning, the president took aim at Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, saying his ideas are crazy and his state can't stand him. The big, beautiful bill, as it's being called, includes tax cuts, spending for border security and national defense, and cuts to Medicaid. It also includes a $4 trillion increase in the nation's borrowing capacity. But it has drawn concern from both conservative and moderate senators over its deficit spending and cuts to social safety net programs. Jesse Burns, senior editor here at The Hill, joins us to discuss. Hi, Jesse. So Senator Paul said yesterday he won't support the bill if the debt ceiling increase is in there. Apparently, the Senate wants to make it $5 trillion. It's $1 trillion more than the House version. Paul is one of the Republican senators who's attacking the bill from the right. How widespread is that sentiment in the Republican Senate?
Well, we've heard it from a few different senators, Senator Rand Paul, of course, but also Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, and they are among this contingent of these more kind of fiscal hawk conservatives or libertarian-leaning members who have really taken issue with this bill for not doing enough to reduce the deficit, in fact, actually increasing the debt ceiling in this bill by $4 trillion or potentially $5 trillion, depending on what the Senate does. Now, it's certain that the Senate, they can afford to lose a couple of senators and still advance this bill. But the issue is that they have people on the moderate side who also have issues with the current cuts that are already in this bill, specifically with Medicaid, but also scaling back some of the green energy incentives and tax credits that were included in the Inflation Reduction Act passed under President Biden. And so if the Senate makes big changes either direction to either reduce some of these cuts or increase more cuts, that risks alienating a number of Republicans, and too many that they can afford to lose.
Yeah, I want to get to those clean energy credits here in a second, but on the issue of the debt ceiling, is it even possible to take that out at this point? I mean, I guess it would give conservatives some comfort in that they could have another fight over spending cuts later on.
Well, the complicating issue here is that the Treasury Department and Secretary Scott Bessent have signaled that the United States is really running up against the deadline when it comes to those special measures that they use to try to stave off the debt ceiling. And he said that basically Congress has to act by mid-July in order to raise that current debt ceiling. And so that is something that members of both the House and the Senate are racing to try to address. And the issue if they try to separate it, they would likely have to rely on Democrats to actually advance a debt ceiling hike. And that's something that they don't want to try to do. Democrats have signaled they don't want to go along with Republicans in general on this legislation. And so it's a very risky proposition to try to separate them. And of course, Trump pushing for Republicans to be more aggressive so that they don't have to deal with raising the debt ceiling again during his term.
Democrats would likely have their own demands if they were to have to participate in something like that. On the other side of the Senate, you have senators like Josh Hawley who worry about the bill's cuts to Medicaid. He posted yesterday that he had a great conversation with the president. They both agree no cuts. What exactly amounts to a cut seems like it's up to interpretation, because surely the final bill is going to decrease Medicaid spending. Can they find a way to appease senators like Hawley, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, who don't want to cut Medicaid?
It's a very tricky line to walk, and we saw this when President Trump visited Capitol Hill a few weeks ago, where he really did push House Republicans to get in line to advance the bill. At the same time, he was publicly saying that he didn't want cuts to Medicaid, even though the House bill that they passed, as you mentioned, do include deep cuts based on nonpartisan independent analysis of what they're actually doing. And so Josh Hawley's been very vocal, probably perhaps the most vocal House Republican senator on this topic. And so, you know, he has said if this does touch Medicaid, he's not going to go along with it. Now, there is room for interpretation on what that actually means and how far they go. But remember as well, depending on what happens in the Senate, if they make big changes to this, whatever changes they pass, that's going to have to go back to the House, which narrowly passed this with just one vote. And so they have very little margin, almost no margin in the House to actually work with.
And you mentioned it earlier, this issue of clean energy tax credits. They were passed by Democrats during the Biden administration. Republicans in the House want to revoke them, but you have some Republican senators saying, wait a minute, these are benefiting my state.
That's right, and we've seen this, typically with big legislation. We saw it with the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was also passed under the Biden administration. Republicans roundly criticized it, but then after money started flowing to their districts, to their states, they wanted to keep those benefits in place. The same goes for many of these green energy tax credits. We've seen some Republican senators, you mentioned a few, who have issues with scaling back, or at least scaling back so quickly, some of those IRA benefits. And now President Trump is certainly putting the screws to these senators, trying to get them to support this legislation. He's kind of not really delved into a lot of the details based on what he said publicly, but he certainly wants both the moderate Republicans and the fiscal hots to try to get in line on this because it is the biggest piece of legislation so far in his second term.
It seems like President Trump usually gets his way on stuff like this. What are you going to be watching for over the next several weeks to let us know if Republicans in the Senate are moving in a direction toward passing the bill or that they're running into major problems?
I think one thing to watch will be the deadline for passing this. Now, Republicans have been very aggressive when it comes to the deadlines that they have used throughout this entire process, and it has really helped them to corral members to advance the legislation. We saw it in the House when they tried to get that bill done before Memorial Day. That deadline really stuck, and they were able to corral members to get behind it and narrowly advance it. And the big deadline to watch now is July 4. Congress is pushing to pass this legislation in the Senate and work through all of the different committee work over the next several weeks and then advance it to a floor vote by July 4th and get it to President Trump's desk. That involves having any changes that the Senate adopts be also adopted by the House. And so there's a very tight window over the next few weeks for the Senate to get this done and for Republicans in the House to go along with any major changes that the Senate tries to adopt.
Lots to do in what is basically 1 month. We'll continue to follow. Jesse Burns, thanks so much.
Thank you.